Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel. I have an update for you of critical significance and importance to anyone that's an XRP holder, even though XRP, yes, absolutely, unquestionably does have legal clarity, and yes, even though the remaining portion of the SEC v. Ripple lawsuit really has, serious ramifications potentially for Ripple, some are concerned. And attorney Bill Morgan of the XRP community has expressed such concerns and highlighted that Ripple even has a concern that depending on what happens in the remedies portion of the SEC v. Ripple lawsuit, which is the portion of the lawsuit that we're in right now, we're going to find out to what degree Ripple gets dinged and if there's going to be some sort of injunction that will impact Ripple's actual operations with on-demand liquidity utilizing XRP as a bridge currency. But this in theory would matter to every XRP holder. In that this would, if things go off the rails and in a way that some think is possible, this would reduce the utility of XRP, and XRP would potentially not be used in on-demand liquidity ever again. Now, I will tell you at the outset, I'm not convinced. So first of all, there's a couple of things to say. I'm not convinced that that's even possible, but I'm open-minded to the possibility. I need to be persuaded. I need more conversation on this. I just don't have sufficient data for me to feel that convinced one way or another. But number two, even if it's possible that that's on the table, that could be a penalty that Judge Torres could decree, hey, XRP can't be used in on-demand liquidity or on-demand liquidity's out on a global scale, even if that power is at hand for Judge Torres. Which, again, I need to be convinced of that. But even if that is true, then there's the question of, is that something Judge Torres is going to do? Is that probable? And I'm not as convinced there either, but it's possible. But before going further, I do want to be clear. I do not have a financial background of any kind. I am not offering financial advice. And you definitely should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. I'm just an enthusiast who enjoys making YouTube videos about crypto-related topics, but just as a hobby and just for fun. All right, so a couple of days ago, I shared the article that's on your screen from the Crypto Basic. Ripple president says Ripple itself has no ODL partners. And just to quickly catch you up to speed in case you missed it, because it's crucial to the content of this video, Ripple itself does not have any on-demand liquidity partners. Literally, Ripple has no customers using XRP as a bridge currency. Well, how is that possible? Isn't that alarming? Well, as I covered in my video at the time, no, this is a strategic move. Ripple has subsidiaries that have law of other geographic regions governing them, not United States law, where they actually facilitate on-demand liquidity transactions. The biggest one is in Singapore. So Ripple's subsidiary in Singapore is subject to Singaporean governance and law, not United States law. That's the reason they structured it like that. And there are a few corridors where on-demand liquidity touches the United States from one of those subsidiaries overseas. And in those instances, they're using on-demand liquidity, but they're not using XRP. They're using stablecoins. I believe it's Tether, right? And that's strategic, So that makes all the sense. So I just want to make sure everybody is caught up there. And then the top two posts here, there's one from XRP community member Sherry and one from attorney Bill Morgan on April 25th. Those two I covered in the video, my video the other day where I was on this topic. The rest of actually this one too that I wrote, this I covered, but I need to cover it real quickly again just to get everybody caught up to speed. Everything after that is brand new. So I think anyway. And so XRP community member Sherry wrote the following. If Torres rules on a permanent injunction in the ODL, I am out. The damage it could cause to Ripple's business is a risk I don't want to wade through. Sure, they can potentially sustain the business outside of the US, but it's not a gamble I plan to play. Sigh. Okay, and so I went into great detail as to why I respectfully disagree and I don't have those concerns, although I am willing to be persuaded because, again, there's a chance that I could be persuaded if I have knowledge that exists out there that I just don't know exists. Okay, just leave it at that. But, as far as the risks with on-demand liquidity, I did note, and I'll just be real brief with this, that, in terms of what Ripple's doing with XRP, it's never been detectable in the price of XRP. Anytime there's great news about XRP and Ripple's building out ODL or whatever, the market's never cared. If it went away, does the market care? To what degree? I don't know. There's a whole XRP ecosystem out there. And so to think that XRP doesn't have better days ahead, even without it being used as a bridge currency, I don't agree with that. I simply don't agree with that. I really don't. But people are entitled to their opinions. It's not a dig against anybody that does believe that. I just happen to have a different perspective. That's all. That's all that is. But I also was thinking, okay, if the worst comes down, is it really gonna screw Ripple on a global scale or just the United States? So more on that in a second, but Attorney Bill Morgan reposted that and he said, you ought to be concerned. So he's agreeing with Sherry and he says, those saying it doesn't matter because XRP itself has clarity are underestimating the adverse consequences for XRP and the XRPL ecosystem of a broad permanent injunction that stops Ripple's ODL or stops use of XRP in ODL. So there's two concerns. What he expressed there is that, number one, Attorney Bill Morgan is saying, what if there's an injunction that stops on-demand liquidity regardless of whether or not XRP is using it? And he's also saying, or there could be an injunction where ODL could be stopped if XRP is used in it. That's what he said in that last sentence right there. It's on your screen. And so I responded to that and said, Ripple President Monica Long says they don't have any ODL customers according to Ripple's latest filing. A Singaporean subsidiary has ODL customers using XRP, but Ripple itself does not. Would an injunction to stop Ripple's ODL apply to Singaporean subsidiary? If not, then as far as I can tell, a worst case scenario here is ODL will continue to be used in any corridor so long as it doesn't touch the United States. And so basically the reason I wrote to him is because I've always had tremendous respect for Attorney Bill Morgan, and I think he's really insightful. He's got a lot of valuable perspectives, and he's been helping out our community to make sense of what's been going on in the SEC v. Ripple case literally for years. And so he's one of the handful of attorneys in the community I go to if I got a question. And so I saw this being discussed, and I knew it was happening as far as the conversation with, around what Monica Long had to say about Ripple not actually having any ODL customers. So I just was seeking clarity, and I actually still am. I actually don't have great clarity on part of this, and we'll get to that in just a second. But Attorney Bill Morgan did see the video that I published on this topic, and he responded. So I don't know if you're listening to Attorney Bill Morgan now, but thank you very much. I always appreciate your perspective on this, and it helps me to make sense of this stuff because I am not an attorney. I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on YouTube. That's it, right? And so and this is incredible. This is really cool stuff here. He caught some interesting stuff. And this is one of those things where it's like, if you are a lawyer and you know how to look at this type of stuff, you've got a chance at picking this up. And if you're not, you'd probably read through this and not necessarily come to the same realizations and understandings that someone like an attorney like Attorney Bill Morgan did come to here. So this is interesting. Check this out. He wrote to me and said, okay, Matt, didn't have time yesterday, but given that you were kind enough to cover this issue on YouTube, I have followed up on the point you made about Ripple not having ODL customers and operating through overseas subsidiaries in response to my concern that a wide injunction can have a serious impact on use of XRP in ODL. And so I'll pause a note there. In the previous post, he did cite that there was a concern, as I just showed you on the screen, and I don't know if he still holds that perspective or not. Or maybe I misunderstood him. There's always understand as I'm repeating this out, I'm sharing with you literally verbatim what was written. There's a chance that I'm misunderstanding something. I always throw that out there as well. But he said again in my response to the concern that a wide injunction can have a serious impact on the use of XRP and ODL. But that's one concern. But he also articulated a concern that it could just be an injunction against ODL broadly speaking, regardless of the coin. Here specifically, he's only citing XRP though, so I'm not 100% sure if he thinks it would just be XRP that is in trouble or the entirety of ODL, regardless of what is used as the bridge. And then he wrote, below is the wide injunction the SEC seeks, and I have highlighted it, and also the part that may catch subsidiaries. And so, folks, this is interesting. And I'll pull up full screen in a second, but he found something that, and it looks like he's right, I don't doubt that the SEC puts something in this that looks like a catch-all. And so then the question would be is, if it's a catch-all, does that apply to jurisdictions that are not within the United States? And then he wrote, the other image is an extract from Ripple's opposition brief and clearly shows that Ripple is concerned that the wide injunction the SEC seeks, if not restricted, may impact the ODL operations of its overseas subsidiaries. Now that is incredibly interesting. And so this is proof. This is a really good argument that Ripple actually is concerned that on-demand liquidity on a global scale is at risk. So, and now mind you, I'm still not 100% convinced because I need clarity on a couple things, but this is a good argument that he brings forth here. And so let me share with you the first screen grab. This is what the SEC wrote. Let me read this to you. Defendant is permanently restrained, and so this is what they want to happen here. Defendant is permanently restrained and enjoined from directly or indirectly conducting an unregistered offering of institutional sales. It is further ordered, adjudged, and decreed that, as provided in Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 65D2, the foregoing paragraph also binds the following who receive actual notice of this final judgment by personal service or otherwise: A, defendant's officers, agents, servants, employees, and attorneys, and B, other persons in active concert or participation with defendant or with anyone described in it. So that last part, if you're looking at the screen, you can see where Attorney Bill Morgan highlighted this. He's saying that that's basically a catch-all. So up here, here's what they want, and then down here, here's the catch-all, saying, but this applies to anybody that even remotely touches Ripple. So then the question is, well, if that's the case, if this is a catch-all, doesn't that apply to the subsidiary then? Now, I don't have a 100% answer on that still, and this is why I don't know for sure if Attorney Bill Morgan knows that specific point. He may, and I just haven't seen him articulated. But I'm just kind of curious because I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here because I'm just thinking, like, the subsidiary is subject to A, United States law, or B, Singaporean law. Well, the answer is B. We know that it's B, unquestionably, for sure. So then I brought up, and I think I've got a post where I'm going to talk about this more in just a second. If there's an instance where some rule from the United States can override that gets into international law. And I remember that going back to my college days. It's one of the things that I learned. It's like international law. It's just, it's something that, nations agree upon. I think this is one of my criminology courses or so, I can't remember what. And it's basically a handshake agreement, because if you have international law, and then, if there is something set up and the nations agree, say Singapore and the United States agree that, if there's something rolled in the United States, then that is now law in Singapore. The United States isn't going to come in there with armed guards or police or something like that, or the military, to enforce that. It's up on the handshake agreement via international law that Singaporean government would respect the ruling that came from the United States. That's what international law is, effectively, in a nutshell. And I'm not an expert on that. I just remember that from my college days. So this is going way back. But that's the case there. So without something like that, if there's not some sort of arrangement, then the subsidiary being wholly operating in a different region, and it's not directly Ripple's management that's governing it, or it's not tied in that way, and it is under Singaporean law. I'm having trouble seeing how, outside of some sort of agreement in international law, I'm having trouble seeing how any subsidiary and the actions they're doing with Ripple payments, on-demand liquidity, I'm having trouble understanding how or why, outside of that, this would be impacted. So that's the piece that I still want clarified. So I'm not 100% certain, but I'm having trouble understanding at this point how it could possibly be that we should be worried about on-demand liquidity. That's why, right? But Attorney Bill Morgan has a great point here, and this is a great argument. So this is where he's pointing out, this image, he says, again, is an extract from Ripple's opposition brief and clearly shows that Ripple is concerned that the wide injunction the SEC seeks, if not restricted, may impact the ODL operations of its overseas subsidiaries. And so even if it's the case that, if it's the case that, we shouldn't have to worry about what's happening in Singapore because it's under Singaporean governance. Well, why is Ripple worried about it then? Do they know something we don't? Is it the case that if we get a bad judgment in the United States, it will apply overseas and on a global scale? Well, based on this, you might think that the answer is yes. And so this is why this is a good argument in defense of that. And this is what Attorney Morgan highlighted. And it reads as follows. Part 2 of the proposed judgment would prohibit without exception any unregistered offering of institutional sales. That language could be read to bar all post-complaint ODL sales regardless of their characteristics. It could be read to prohibit conduct that is lawful in other jurisdictions. So folks, And so that's why that's a good argument. It's like Ripple's concerned, right? They're saying it could be read to be intended that way, right? Meaning that if the SEC got what they wanted, it could be interpreted that this shouldn't be allowed on a global scale, not in Singapore, any subsidiary, not in any part of the world. Good point, right? Okay. Now, I still don't have clarity, and now let me further explain why. So I responded to Attorney Bill Morgan, and I wrote the following. Thanks, Bill. Your post makes sense. At this point, my biggest question is, does a New York judge have actual power to override Singaporean law? Bottom line, that's what matters. If so, what is the enforcement mechanism? Will the Singaporean government come down harshly on the subsidiary because the New York judge has decreed that should be done? That sounds like an international law issue, and I'm way out of my depths on that matter. So, folks, that's what I was referencing a couple minutes ago. I know, broadly speaking, in a very general sense, that's how international law works. You just have to play nice with one another. It's almost on the honor system. If you have an agreement with another nation, you should follow through with it. That's why there's all sorts of agreements in terms of extradition, this and that. It's international law. That is what it is. But it would still have to be, if this is going to be enforced, it would have to be the Singaporean government coming down because the United States says you got to do this. And that would only happen if there's an agreement via international law. That's my understanding anyway. That's the reason that I brought that up. Without that, I don't know how this happens, and I do not have clarity on that yet, even after the discussion I've had with Attorney Bill Morgan. So I need more information on that, which is why my mind isn't 100% made up as to the degree of which on-demand liquidity is truly at risk. Anyway, then I continue. I wrote, it's also worth noting that the SEC has not explicitly stated their suggested injunction should apply to non-U.S. jurisdictions. Yes, there is a catch-all statement, as you point out, but should we assume the SEC expects that catch-all statement to apply where it knows the U.S. has no jurisdiction? And so, folks, hopefully that makes sense just as written. But again, if you look at what Attorney Morgan highlighted here, this first screen grab here, yes, this does look like a catch-all. I absolutely agree that was pretty savvy of him to recognize, yeah, that what they wrote there, what's on your screen at the bottom, that looks like a catch-all. Anybody that's in association with Ripple. But then my question again, right there, going back to what I wrote, is, okay, if that's a catch-all, that makes sense. But basically, my question is, can a catch-all apply to a jurisdiction that the United States does not have control over? And I don't know how the answer is yes, unless there's some sort of international law agreement, basically, as I've been referencing here. So I don't see how that in and of itself, though it's a good point he brought up, I don't even know that the SEC intended for it to be taken that way. They could just like, maybe the SEC is assuming, well, yeah, we don't have jurisdiction there. It's just where it would apply, obviously, right? Because they wouldn't need to cite that this wouldn't apply to other jurisdictions. It would just be assumed, right? So I don't know for sure. Maybe they could be intending to have that apply, and they could come back and fight and say, no, this is the catch-all. It applies to other jurisdictions. They could try and do that. But then we go back to my question of, do they have the legal ability to enforce that via international law or otherwise, right? And then I wrote, it makes me wonder if the second screen grab you shared, in which Ripple expresses concern about an injunction applying to other jurisdictions, might be, excuse me, out of an abundance of caution rather than concern that a New York judge has any real power to control what businesses do in Singapore. Specifically, I'm wondering, even if Ripple knows that a New York judge can't override Singaporean law, the SEC could still sue on the matter fallaciously. Is it possible Ripple is mentioning this to prevent future litigation on the matter rather than out of actual fear that Judge Torres can override Singaporean law? Okay, so let me bring that back up to make sure my point is understood there. So now we're back on the point. This is, Bill Morgan shared this, where Ripple is expressing concern that if the SEC gets their way, that an injunction could be far-reaching and actually have an impact on a global scale in jurisdictions outside of the United States. Ripple is expressing concern. That's true. That's what's on your screen there. But what I'm questioning is Ripple expressing this right here? Are they expressing that concern because they're concerned the SEC would fallaciously make the argument that the injunction should be applied even in jurisdictions where the United States shouldn't have control? Are they just concerned that there could be another bogus lawsuit? That's what I'm saying. Or is it the case that they're actually concerned that if Judge Torres ruled in such a way that it's enforceable, I don't have clarity on that. It could just be that Ripple doesn't want to deal with another BS lawsuit. I don't know. And then I wrote, I don't have the answers, but with no legal background here, I'll just say I'd be surprised if Judge Torres can do anything to impact what a business is doing in Singapore. Unless, of course, there is an arrangement between the U.S. and Singapore via international law, which I'm unaware of. As always, your perspective is appreciated. Now, Attorney Bill Morgan did have one more response, and then I wrote back, and that's where it ultimately ends here. But Attorney Morgan wrote to me and said, the issue is not superseding the law of another jurisdiction. The issue is Ripple and its subsidiaries being in contempt and in breach of the injunction for transactions, even if other jurisdictions, in other jurisdictions, if Ripple is involved in the transaction. Seriously, why take the risk when you can use another bridge currency in ODL? And so upon reading that, unless I'm just not understanding him, I was left with the same question effectively, because again, he said the issue is Ripple and its subsidiaries being in contempt and in breach of the injunction for transactions, even if other jurisdictions, if Ripple is involved in the transaction. So again, that's why my question stands. It has, like, I still don't know. And maybe he did. Maybe I worded mine too clunky and he didn't understand what I was asking. Maybe that's why I didn't get an answer. I don't know. But I'm still wondering here. But if the issue is Ripple and its subsidiaries being in contempt, how is a subsidiary in contempt if the United States doesn't have rule over that region of the world? So basically, he just kind of repeated, effectively what my question is in a way. Like, so here's what I said in response. I wrote, am I misunderstanding something? I thought the concern was about on-demand liquidity not being allowed as a result of the injunction, regardless of what coin is used. And so I'll pause to note, the reason I said that is if you go back to this original post, Bill Morgan wrote the following. Those saying you ought to be concerned, so referencing concern about on-demand liquidity on a global scale. Those saying it doesn't matter because XRP itself has clarity are underestimating the adverse consequences for XRP and the XRP ledger ecosystem of a broad permanent injunction that stops Ripple's ODL or stops use of XRP in ODL. And so that's the reason I said what I said. He's referencing here as a concern on April 25th that all of ODL could be shut down regardless of the coin, or ODL utilizing XRP could be shut down. He's saying either is an option. And so that left me a little bit confused as well, because now he's talking specifically just about XRP, XRP as a bridge currency being a problem rather than broadly on-demand liquidity. So that's why I wrote that. And then I wrote, Ripple's subsidiary in Singapore is already not using XRP in ODL for any transactions that touch the United States if the injunction, if the injunction applies only to XRP and ODL, but not any other coin in ODL, then the status quo would remain, right? And so what I'm saying, pause here, what I'm saying there is, if there's an injunction that says XRP cannot be used as a bridge currency, well, then that's what's happening right now. There's no corridor touching the United States that uses XRP. There's no corridor that touches the United States using XRP. We're using a stablecoin already. So if Judge Torres doesn't have control of what corridors not touching the United States use, if other corridors after the injunction, or regardless of the injunction, can use XRP as a bridge currency, then what changes? That I don't see what changes. Because if the judge says, no, you can't use XRP in a corridor touching the United States, it's like, oh, well, okay, we're already doing that. So where's the problem? How does that harm XRP? I don't see how that harms XRP. And then I wrote, XRP would be used by the subsidiary in Singapore for any corridor that doesn't touch the U.S., and a stablecoin would be used for any corridor that does touch the U.S. And so again, folks, to be clear, whether we get such an injunction, let me word it like this. If we get such an injunction, talking too fast. If we get such an injunction, the state of things at that point would be the same as they are now. And if we don't get an injunction, then XRP could be used in the corridors, presumably, even touching the United States. So if anything, things get better, not worse. And if I'm missing something, I just need to be informed of that. But I don't see how it actually gets worse. Unless, again, I'll say again, there's some sort of international law arrangement where the New York judge actually has power over Singaporean law. And again, that sounds crazy on the surface, but it can happen if there's some sort of international law arrangement. But again, the Singaporean government would have to enforce that still, not the United States. The United States can't do that. And then I wrote, I suppose my primary question remains. Are Ripple subsidiaries definitely required to adhere to whatever Judge Torres rules? You said, and this is me quoting Attorney Bill Morgan here, and I did this just to make sure that it's clear what I'm referencing. It's nice to have things flow from one to the next, because writing stuff on social media platform X, it is difficult. It's much more difficult than just having a conversation. Like, think about how long I've been talking in this video and how many words I've used. If I had to put that as precisely as possible into text here on social media platform X, that's a struggle, because then I want to point back to other stuff and then say, but it's so much easier to just use mouth words. But so anyway, so I quoted Attorney Morgan here, and I said that he said, quote, "The issue is Ripple and its subsidiaries being in contempt and in breach of the injunction for transactions, even in other jurisdictions if Ripple is involved in the transactions," end quote. And so I wrote, a Ripple subsidiary engaging in an ODL transaction is not the same as Ripple engaging in an ODL transaction, right? So then wouldn't the solution to make sure Ripple is not in breach be to just have the subsidiary continue to handle all of the ODL transactions? And so again, if you look at what he said right here, the reason that I wrote that, to be clear here, he wrote, the issue is Ripple and its subsidiaries being in contempt and in breach of the injunction for transactions, even if other jurisdictions if Ripple is involved in the transaction. So he's saying, even if other jurisdictions participate using XRP or even just ODL broadly speaking, that's a problem for Ripple if Ripple's involved. But then I'm saying in response to that, but what if Ripple isn't involved? Because if it's just a subsidiary, that's not Ripple. And that's where this ends. I haven't gotten a response from him to this point. But so I do have some questions still here, but I'm still not seeing. I understand that he has expressed concern, and others in the community have expressed concern that this could be really bad for on-demand liquidity. And they could be right, but I don't know that they're right because I need more information. And so right at this point, and again, it just goes back to what I was saying towards the beginning part of the video, unless there's something in international law, if there's some sort of arrangement, I don't see how this is a problem. Because Judge Torres, outside of some sort of international law agreement, Judge Torres cannot rule over Singaporean law. You just can't. It doesn't work like that. And so if that company's over there just doing what they're doing, what are you going to say? Well, Ripple, you're bad. You're not in control of this, but they're doing that over there in another part of the world. And it's not even affecting anyone in the United States. But what does that do? Like, Ripple gets penalized for what a company is doing in another part of the world. Is that an argument? I haven't seen that being argued here. Is that an argument? So that's why I'm saying I don't have all of the answers. But so I'm not persuaded strongly in either direction that it is a problem or isn't a problem. I need more data. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much where I'm at right now. So that's the latest here. If I do get an answer or additional clarity from Attorney Bill Morgan or anybody else that is insightful, I'll be happy to share it with you. But as a result of this, until I have additional information, I'm not concerned that there's some sort of way that Judge Torres can rule over this and actually destroy this. And on top of that, I'm kind of skeptical she'd rule in that direction, though I certainly acknowledge she could. She could rule in a way that it would harm Ripple specifically and what they're doing with on-demand liquidity. But again, that's the reason Ripple structured things the way they did. That's why they have separate companies that they aren't directly governing doing their thing. That's the reason that they're doing this. So anyway, I'll go ahead and wrap up here. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo.